Well, what I have done is I have radically changed direction because I was getting the feeling that since we're not trying to form a prayer group, I thought that another talk or two on prayer would not be appropriate. So for the second time, I'm changing directions in the middle of an activity. So this kind of talk is going to be much lighter and much less pondersome, and it'll be very much down to earth, and it'll have a different perspective. And in order to get at that different perspective, I'll have to go into a personal idiosyncrasy of mine. This is one of those talks where the introduction is longer than the talk. My idiosyncrasy is that I find it very difficult to read science fiction. I've tried on a number of occasions to read science fiction, but I can't bring myself to it. And it's not for literary reasons, because there are some very fine writers in the field of science fiction. It is because of philosophical differences. And in that, looking at the philosophical differences, it's not because of the fantasy aspect. There are some very fine fantasy writers that use their imagination extremely well. And some of them even bring in high moral and ethical import. So it isn't that element. And it's not even because of the materialism, which is assumed in science fiction. It's in all fiction is materialistic. In fact, even quite a bit of what we call spiritual literature is materialistic. Almost every person you know is a materialist. The way we look at spiritual things is very mechanical. We don't look at it always in the flow of the Spirit. It is because of the philosophy of time and the philosophy of perspective that I can't read science fiction, or I won't read science fiction. It irks me that they try to prognosticate the future when the philosophy of time is so poor. Just recently, about 3 months ago, Scientific American had an article, had a whole issue dedicated to time, and it was stupid. It did not have any depth to it at all. The philosophies of time that they had, almost like juvenile. Actually, it's very difficult to forecast and to predict with any accuracy. It's very hard to conceive of new things, to do something that's never been done before. Creative minds are wonderful. It's even hard to accept new things, because we become so attached through our insecurity in the past that we can't accept new things. What happens with science fiction writers is that in lieu of not being highly creative and not having a view of the future, what they do is they take something of the present and they extrapolate it in an exaggerated way into the future. Thus, one is presented with a distorted view of the present, when that's not the way it works in history. Whenever there is something in the present that is not harmonious, it gets weeded out. It can't continue to go on. The second philosophical problem that irks me is a problem that materialistic science in general has, not only science fiction. And that problem is a philosophical perspective that is exclusively one way. And that one way is bottom up. Stated in a very simple way, it is a view that something lesser can make something greater than itself. And that's a view that suffers from great logical difficulties. By contrast, mysticism claims that we were divinely all conscious before we began our descent into matter and into creaturehood in order to develop objective consciousness and to develop creative and waking all consciousness. So mysticism is both a top-down and a bottom-up view of things. And so it doesn't suffer from those same kinds of logical difficulties. We can unfold divine creative genius because we were divine in the first place. Thus, as we climb out of our immersion in matter, we can be creative about it because that's what we were here for in the first place. Materialism has us blindly groping, and we're governed on one hand by chance and then by deterministic laws on the other hand, and there's no freedom. It's kind of difficult to defend a worldview if it's a product of chance, if a different chance would have produced a different truth. It's kind of hard to defend a worldview that's based on determinism because any answer would itself be predetermined. There is no freedom. One cannot transcend. If one is part of the truth and one is part of the purpose, the metaphysics of that view is such that one can know the truth and can share it because all parties share the same reality, and that reality transcends the limiting material conditions. Now, if a person is diplomatic, you can say your notion of truth is unacceptable because a different random event might have made your view of truth different, and the truth would not be constant. If you want to be a little sarcastic, you can say if you had a different breakfast, your argument might have been different, but it's not a very pleasant way to go. And you can say the same thing about determinism. I can't accept your view because your view is determined. It may or may not be true from your point of view. So both statements are made from the stance of knowing spiritually, of intuitively experiencing a unity that transcends or in which materialism is suspended. Controlled knowing, self-consciousness, is a very different thing from chance or determinism. Fortunately, the way it works out, even if materialists do believe in randomism and determination, they take it for granted that they have an intuitive truth-knowing, and they don't live by what their philosophies are. Their philosophies are more just a mental exercise. Otherwise, they would have an extremely hard time getting on in the world. However, when they indulge themselves in inconsistent metaphysics, we get such absurdities as 2001, A Space Odyssey, in which people have created a computer that is more intelligent than them. And I don't know how they figured out that they could make something more intelligent with a lesser intelligence, but that's what you get when you have a bottom-up consciousness. To be fair, there is some science fiction that does ask existential questions, and it does probe the truth. Back in the 80s, there was one of the best films of that decade was a science fiction film called Blade Runner. And it was based on a science fiction book called Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep? And it asked very deep questions about what our existence is about. It asked the to be or not to be question quite well. And it even went into the exalted place of love in our consciousness. I thought it was, I never read the book, but obviously. But it was an excellent film, I'm sort of a film person, not so much anymore. I used to go to movies at least once a week. It's possible to have too much of a top-down view of things. When I was young, I suffered from a mild case of Platonitis, wherein everything had to be top-down or it wasn't true. Fortunately, life and the exigencies of life and the nature of stuff cured me of this anti-evolutionary aberration that I had. If we want mystical fulfillment, we have to be whole people. We have to be balanced people. And that means we have to be like the cosmos, both top-down and bottom-up. And we have to find the right proportion for each, which may shift. These talks were developed when I began trying to get healing groups started, and they were directed to a group that was becoming a healing prayer group. So healing provided an excellent example of why we need both approaches. Mystics claim that almost all illness begins as bad thinking. If we have untrue thoughts, we produce untrue bodies when we come to rebirth. If we have adharmonious thoughts, we produce internal discord within our own being. If we have destructive thoughts, we produce destructive things in ourselves. Just smell your sweat after you've been angry. It's a tough thing. Eventually our thoughts initiate feelings and desires, and they in turn motivate action. And then the action becomes physical. Our physical form is a precipitation of action over a long period of time. It represents frozen energy. So our illnesses, injuries, physical conditions are ultimately the consequences of thoughts. Obviously, if we get control of our thoughts and freely choose to think careful, true thoughts, and to think harmoniously with others, to be constructive and helpful and pro-evolutionary in our thinking, we'll eventually have completely healthy lives. Now, it may require some patience, because it takes time to get a hold of the thought process, which is very, very slippery, and it may take several past lives to correct the backlog of bad thoughts that we have set into action. All of us, because we haven't been sweethearts in the past, carry a huge burden of sin. So eventually, it's a big word when in spirit everything seems so instantaneous and omnipresent. But eventually, we will have healthy and very remarkable bodies. Some, such as adepts, have already done so. And we've all heard those wondrous stories about what they can do. Now, this is a top-down approach to health. However, life is more than top-down. It's also bottom-up, and it's ongoing. We can't stop life to gain perfection of our thoughts. We have to do it on the fly, and even though we may take special periods and recorrect our thinking, recenter ourselves, those things are certainly advisable, but we can't stop life. Now, a very simple example will immediately demonstrate the importance of the bottom-up approach and of doing things on the fly. Suppose we happen onto an automobile accident and we find someone severely wounded and bleeding profusely. It would obviously be absurd and imprudent to start telling that person that they should begin practicing good thinking, perfect control of thoughts, and to warn them about the consequences of rash thoughts. Or if we sat next to that individual and started a session on thought substitution to purify the mind, it would be absurd. The prudent thing to do would be to apply first aid to stop the bleeding and call 911. Now, not all situations in life are so obvious and so easy to read, but this is a clear example of a bottom-up approach that cannot be ignored. So for the last few talks, as we've been talking about spiritual exercises, we've been talking mostly about top-down things. This talk will be almost exclusively bottom-up, and it'll be about as material as we get. And the title of the talk could be called Diet, Nutrition, and Physical Health for the Spiritual Aspirant, or Why I Am a Vegetarian. This is meant to be one out of about 3 talks, but we're only going to do this one because the other 2, the notes have not been composed yet, because they'll get into other aspects of personal effects of living. When one mentions being a vegetarian, and if you meet somebody who is a new vegetarian, it can be a pretty obnoxious thing. You meet somebody new that you've never met before, and within 2 minutes of meeting them, they're telling you that they're a vegetarian. I think we've all run into that kind of immature vegetarianism. But it's still a curiosity. And people ask, why vegetarianism? A lot of people are cautious about it, because there are a lot of food fanatics out there. And there are a lot of doctrinaire people that have as their primary doctrine a doctrine of nutrition. The diet is one of the few things of the spiritual path that's relatively easy to control. And so we spend ourselves lavishly on it because it's one thing that we can do. So there are quite a few answers that get into quite a few spiritual topics to that question, why vegetarianism? And we'll look at just a few of them. We'll look at a few of the most important ones, and the other ones will be some other time. The first and foremost reason for vegetarianism among students of the mysteries is an ethical reason. No one can possibly unite with the universal spirit. No one can progress on the path of holiness who participates in practices that are productive of unnecessary pain, unnecessary suffering, and premature death. Some pain and some suffering is part of evolution. As the exercise people say, no pain, no gain. But there's an awful lot of unnecessary pain. There's an awful lot of agony and suffering that is unnecessary. And if we participate in that, if we condone that, we're not part of the universal spirit that is consistent with the universal spirit in our being. All of the great spiritual leaders, take for example Jesus or Buddha, had as their primary focus love and compassion and service in ethics and morality. They could have spoken of science or politics. They could have turned bread into stones and taught people how to do it. But they realized what was most important. It's almost a way that you can tell who is a valid spiritual figure is how much they put their attention on the things that are most important to humanity. Love, compassion, service, ethics, morality, those are the things that count. The world is in a sorry state, not because of lack of scientific knowledge or technical knowledge, or because we have the wrong system. It is because we live selfishly and we don't care about each other. We don't love. If we live by those values of love and compassion and service, we progress spiritually irrespective of the metaphysical doctrine or even of what practices we pursue, what kinds of meditation we may do. That already. Well, this will be a short talk. In the very early talks in this series, we talked about cosmography in microcosm and macrocosm. We noted and we tried to substantiate from personal experience the claim of trained seers that were scientific observers, that what differentiates the human and animal kingdoms from the plant and mineral kingdoms is that the former have a desire body. Having a desire body means we have been able to specialize the stuff of the desire world. And we have the capacity to be motivated. And we have the capacity to feel. Experiences may happen in the physical body, and those experiences may be conducted through the etheric body, but the feeling is in the desire body. This means that suffering and pain and a lot of the agony that is possible is because we have desire bodies. A lot of the unnecessary suffering to the animal kingdom is brought about by an uncaring agribusiness. It's an agribusiness that does unbelievably torturous things. I don't want to get into talking about that because it's not. You can get down in the pits much too easily. Some pain is necessary or we wouldn't evolve. But the animal kingdom would evolve much better or just as well without unnecessary slaughter. This is part of the fall. We have introduced into this beautiful evolutionary creation actions and activities that were never intended to be part of it. It's not necessary to consume animal flesh to live healthy lives. It's not necessary to shorten the lives of animals which are comparatively more fruitful in their experience to the cosmos because of their greater evolutionary development than plants. Moreover, specialized sunshine, you might say, specialized etheric stuff is the gift and the service of the vegetable kingdom. Each kingdom makes its own offering in the world we see around us. The mineral kingdom gives us form. Without the stuff of the mineral kingdom, we would puddle into a formless shape very quickly. The animal kingdom provides the basic desires the emotional attitudes. Each family, even each species, has a character stance. It's primitive, but it is a way that basic attitudes are brought into the world. That's a service of the animal kingdom. We as humans bring thought, self-conscious, creative thought. That's our service. The vegetable kingdom offers vital life. It offers an etheric fluid so that the animals and the humans can live. And the vegetable kingdom does not suffer pain. This sacrifice is necessary, plant sacrifice, because the animals and the humans have temporarily sacrificed the ability to get their energy directly from the sunlight. We've sacrificed that ability to do other things creatively. In our evolutionary state, we can't do everything. So we have to sacrifice. And in that sacrifice, we cooperate with others. We cooperate with our mates because we can't produce new bodies by parthenogenesis. We cooperate with the plant kingdom because we cannot sustain our vital bodies by sunshine. So we share that offering from the vegetables. We can get vital essence from raw milk immediately after it's drawn from the animal. But these days, most of the dairy industry, not all of it, but most of it, is part of agribusiness, and it produces its own category of sins. Now, before we go further with this, I want to be very careful about making some points, because this is, again, one of those topics that we can be very bad about, and we can get into self-righteousness, and we can get into fanaticism. Though we're talking about diet, we have to be careful of being preoccupied with the subject. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. If we think about food all the time, there isn't much to separate us from the materialists. We're in the same kind of thinking, whether we're thinking about food or whether we're thinking about having a lot of money. Moreover, no one is guaranteed good health because of diet. No matter how good the diet is, that can only come when we are completely unsinful in everything from our thoughts right down to our physical being. So it's another kind of unselfishness. We have to be purged. We can have very selfish thoughts about diet. Sometimes this is almost a little neurotic, but going into a grocery store for somebody who's self-sacrificing can be a neurotic adventure. Do you pick the best foods, the ones that look healthiest, or do you sacrifice and pick the worst foods? It becomes a funny kind of issue. Mystics have long maintained that eating is best done as a sacrifice in itself and as a sacrament. And again, we have to take the reminder that one cannot eat oneself into heaven. Now, you can get the vital essence not only from milk, you can get it straight from the blood of freshly slain animals, or even freshly slain humans. But that comes at a very high price. But at least you can see what you're doing. If you go to a slaughterhouse, you can see what you're doing. This is why animals, if If you see an animal that has just killed another animal, it does so, the first thing it does, it rips it apart and it goes for the blood-rich organs when it's made a kill. Because in those blood-rich organs is where it's going to get the etheric stuff that it needs. No animal or no human can live in robust health without the vital flow. And the bulk of it for humans right now comes from the plant kingdom, which offers its body, its own etheric body, as its service. So let's hope that we can always remain kind and caring about the other co-evolutionary beings. Now, a few minutes ago, we mentioned that the service of the animal kingdom was offering basic desire postures to the cosmos. In that connection, we mentioned that species and animal families represented archetypal attitude sets in the desire world. The word zodiac means circle of animals for that very reason. The group spirits that guide the animals function from the desire world, which in some schools is called the realm of the animals. In the Great Bharva Chakra in India, it's called the realm of the animals. Some people call it the starry world as well. Now, all of this is true in a general sense, but with a very close look, it's a little bit different. If we look at the day-to-day life of animals, their life is active mostly in what we would call the lower desires, and not always so much in the archetypal desires that we see astrologically. Science sometimes calls these lower desires the basic instincts. That is, to survival and procreation. The consciousness of most animals, most of the time, is not occupied with lofty sentiments. More often it is occupied with food, either in fight or in flight, or both, and it often includes violence. A lot of it is involved with procreation and sexuality. And as a result, the flesh of the animals is permeated with desire stuff. Rotting animal flesh stinks repulsively. Rotting plants do also, but not quite so horribly. This is because the composition is not just chemical. It is because the physical and vital bodies of animals and humans are interpenetrated by desire bodies. And those desires enter into the very structure of the flesh of animals and humans. As we said, in animals, those desires are mostly basic. In most humans they are. They think about eating and they think about sex an awful lot. In people who are very loving and who are very holy, they actually emit perfume-like odors. There are numbers of cases of saintly people leaving off flower-like odors from their being. No, while they're alive even.
I've seen it after that.
Oh, you've seen it?
First smelled it.
Yeah.
It smelled like flowers.
Yeah. No, how is it, the famous interlude with Ben Jonson? It was Ben Jonson, the man who made the dictionary, the first dictionary person in the English language. He was very persnickety about words, but he was not very persnickety about his personal habits. And he was riding in the train, and this little old lady is in a car with him, and she can't take it any longer. And she looks at him, he said, She says, "Sir, you smell." And he said, "No, madam, I stink, you smell." So it is possible, what our desire nature is permeates our flesh. Even when the desire body has left the physical body at death, its residual effect remains in the materials that have been broken down all the way back to the mineral kingdom. Before everything is broken down, the residual effects of desire are still there. Actually, the minerals themselves, because of passing through plant, animal, and human bodies, undergo a very slight alchemical metamorphosis. Sometimes it can be considerable. That there really is a transmutation of elements that takes place in living beings, or in the bodies of living beings. In any case, when the desire permeated and produced material is consumed as food, the host who does that consumption is influenced by its effect. Now, this influence is very small and it's very subtle. But as we become sensitive and as we are struggling morally and we're carrying our life to the very edge in trying to live a life of love and service, we're sometimes on the edge of that. And taking in animal food can be what tips the scale where we lose again to our desire body. If you think this is not a fact, the case of Caspar Hauser is most interesting. Caspar Hauser was that wonder child that was raised in a cellar for 14 years, never saw light or anything like that, and he still had the Lemurian consciousness. It was his first birth into this kind of a physical body, and so he could remember hundreds of names exactly, and no animals were afraid of him. No animals were afraid of him until he ate meat. And when he ate meat, immediately everything changed for him. So if we are the type of people that are aspiring to do something exceedingly rare and to be exceedingly sensitive and as positive as we can be, that little tiny effect of the desire material of the animal permeating our consciousness can make a difference. It's nip and tuck for us. The first and second sins, the sins of Adam and Cain, the sins of indulgent sex and of violence, are always before us. Movies, television, everything else is filled with sex and violence. And to take it into us is a tough thing to do. Why anybody would want to do it, it's hard to understand. Now this brings up another point. We've been speaking of residual consciousness of the original inhabitant of a body consumed as food, and that it remains after the inhabitant has left it. So it is in line to speak about digestion, absorption, and assimilation a little bit. From the spiritual point of view, digestion is more than the chemical and mechanical process that physiology describes. Actually, it is a fact that all food is poison. Even material science finds that to be true. That doesn't mean that all food is lethal, but it's been measured and remeasured, and any physiologist can tell you that upon ingestion of any food, there is a minute allergic reaction. In most cases, it's negligible. However, if the force of the will of the person consuming the food is not strong or well applied, or if it's only selectively applied, one can have significant food allergies. People who are old or little babies that have not yet learned to assert the will, have difficulties overpowering food. Mystics have taught about this reaction to food long before it was ever known by modern science. They even have a name for the principle involved. In the Rosicrucian Fellowship, it is called the law of assimilation. Each expression, each focus of the universal spirit asserts its being and its consciousness in, on, and through the forms that it has, its bodies. This assertion creates vehicles and imbues them with its being. They are crystallizations. They are emanations from the Spirit. Even if that is a collective body, such as the body of almost any plant or animal. Any focus of the universal spirit seeks to preserve its form and to preserve its autonomy over the form, even if it offers its body as a service, as a food, the way plants do. If this weren't true, plants would not have herbal properties. Those herbal properties are an expression of the character of the focus of the universal spirit that works through that plant body. Therefore, when a being sacrifices its body as food, voluntarily or involuntarily, because the other body that eats it cannot produce that food for itself, that consuming being has to overpower the body that it has consumed. And it has to keep it overpowered, or it will not remain part of its system. In digestion, everything has to be broken down, and it has to be metabolized. And in that metabolization, the spirit has to overpower the food and make it its own. If the consuming entity does not overcome that assertion, the stuff of the body that it has taken in cannot be used as food. It can cause extreme reactions, even poisoning. All organic poisons are specialized proteins, vigorous specialized proteins that we can't digest and that we can't overpower. That's a specialized case of the assertion of will. Now, this principle is not a yes-no principle. It's not like a light switch that's on or off. Some foods can be overpowered, they can be absorbed and assimilated and stay in a body for a longer or shorter amount of time. The primary determiner is the factor that is the evolutionary development of the being. Beings that have evolved longer have developed more will, and they have developed more consciousness, so that they can make extremely complicated, self-reliant forms. Among the forms that we see around us, humans have been around the longest and have developed the strongest evolutionary presence. They have a very strong spiritual assertion. Humans can change the world and are doing so. Therefore, by the principle of assimilation, or the law of assimilation, if you wish to call it that, eating human flesh would be the hardest to overpower and keep overpowered. It would require a good deal of inner power. In fact, people that are involved with cannibalism do it as sort of a macho act to show their power. We would be spending most of our time eating if we lived on a diet of human flesh. There'd be a little time left over because all of our will would be spent in that. If you take carnivorous animals, if you take lions or pythons or something like that, after they have consumed an animal flesh meal, they sleep. The sled dog is the flesh-eating animal that does work. All of the others are vegetarian because they have all of that stamina and energy that comes from vegetarian living. So that if somebody tells you that you're going to be weak if you're a vegetarian, you can point to that fact in nature, and that's the reality. It is true that often vegetarians are weak, but it is not because of their diet. It's because of the type of attitude or the type of person who takes on vegetarianism. They're usually trying to live meek and harmless lives. There have been Olympic athletes, and there have been professional football players in the NFL that have been all-stars that are vegetarian. So the idea that a vegetarian necessarily is weak does not hold. Obviously, after humans, the next most highly evolved beings that we see around us are animals. Therefore, they're the next most difficult to overpower and to keep overpowered. Eating dead animal flesh takes quite a bit of our energy. It tends to keep one active in maintaining it. Obviously, minerals would be the best kind of food if we could digest them, because their consciousness would be easy to overpower and we could keep it with us for a long, long time. However, at our evolution, we have also sacrificed the ability to assimilate minerals directly into our body. Electrolytes, yes, but not beyond electrolytes, no.
Yeah, but the whole leader pharmaceutical idea is based on vegetizing the minerals.
Yes, but they're vegetized.
Okay, but still
Yes.
they're working with minerals.
Yes. Yes,
Metals.
but they have to go through the plant. That's what I'm saying, that you just can't go out and eat a handful of dirt.
But now that you added it, I'm happy about that.
Okay. We're limited in what we can do at our level. We can't do everything, so we sacrifice some activities, so we're able to do other things. Eventually, somewhere along the line, we will take back all of the abilities, and we'll be able to get our etheric substance out of sunlight, and we'll be different kinds of people. This leaves the plant kingdom as our optimal source of food. It is also our intended source of food. Oh no. I didn't want to sneeze onto the tape. That would be very shocking. It's also our intended source of food if you take Scripture. In the Bible, the plant kingdom was given to us for food until the fall. And after the fall, when we entered into this kind of material living deeper and deeper into matter, then animal food came into being. In fact, it was actually even necessary when we went through the fall. Now that we're going through the ascension, it's a different matter. Vegetable food is generally lighter, and it's easier to overpower. And clearly, if we could depend on the lower part of the evolutionary chain, we'd be much better off. I try to make a practice of getting a good amount of my protein from spirulina and chlorella and things like that, the very primitive green plants. Now we could go into the properties of all spiritual properties of all different kinds of foods, but that would be a very large topic, and that would take up one of the other two lectures. And this is meant to be the introductory talk, and so we'll just pass that for now. Instead, let's look at another facet of what we've been looking at right now. It's related to the principle of assimilation. When we discussed mediumship a while back, we mentioned that there were different forms of government that applied for body, soul, and spirit. And for the body, the governance was monarchy. That our body is not something that we can change like a suit of clothes, or that we can let other people use in mediumship or possession. It's actually our creative emanation, the statement of the spirit of our being. For spirit, we said that the form of government was democracy. In spirit, pure spirit, we are equal and at one in the universal spirit. But in soul, or in evolutionary process, the form of government is aristocracy, or better said, meritocracy. That is, the more evolved a being is, the more powers it has, the more abilities it has, and the more responsibilities it has. The more capable and more educated get better jobs among us. And it's often because they're the only ones that are capable of doing them. They're valuable. Being a zero or a grunt like I was, you're interchangeable. One can be equally precious and valuable to another just in one's being, while simultaneously being more valuable as an evolutionary agent. Because the animals have been around longer, they have evolved more consciousness in evolution than the plants have. They have evolved more abilities. They're mobile. They have the whole motive force about them. And they can express higher archetypical qualities than the plants can. So in an evolutionary sense, they are more valuable. Even if they're just subsisting in their bodies and living out. We've said it before that we're not conscious of our own selfhood. A lot of activity of our spiritual being, even in the body, we're unconscious of. Our waking self-consciousness is only an island. So when animals are removed from the evolutionary process in their prime, it hurts their development. And it hurts the work of the creation. Their living consciousness is valuable. It's a big loss. Chief Joseph understood it very clearly. He said, if you start taking out all the animals, things are going to be in a tough shape for all of evolution. It must be enormously frustrating for the group spirit of the animals to carry out its evolutionary work. A lot of animals get to a certain young prime of life, and they're taken out immediately. They never get to experience an entire life cycle. If you think about it, most of the foods that we eat from the vegetable kingdom as veggies are annuals. And they would have only one season of life anyway. Things that we eat as fruits or as seeds or as nuts, in most cases we're not harming the plant even. So it must be horrible for evolved animals to suffer pain and all of those things when they don't deserve it. We like to complain about our pains and agonies. Most of us are at the age where we have some always of some kind. But we know from cause and consequence that we're only getting what we deserve. If we think about it, it's a really hard thing. Even Christ Jesus, we slew once in innocence. But every day we slay millions of animals who are completely innocent. They didn't do anything to deserve the pain and suffering that they're getting. We owe them big time. Somewhere in evolution, we're going to have to do some extremely special service to the animal kingdom. Now, we said some things, and I've been saying them in a strong way. I hope not in a way that is offensive, but any time you say something strong, there's the possibility of misimpressions, and so let's clear up some of the possible misimpressions. The first likely misimpression is a matter of omission, as much as it's a matter of misimpression. We have two different kinds of nutritional needs. And in some respects, the fulfillment of each countermands the fulfillment of the other. We have to fulfill the needs of the physical body, and we have to fulfill the needs of the biological ethers of the vital body. In this regard, digestion of food for the dense body is completely chemical. And in most cases, the dense physical digestion, the overpowering, the absorption and assimilation is made much easier by temperate cooking. No matter what the food source, temperate cooking makes it easier. However, cooking in any form drives out the ether, especially the life ether, from food. This is a process that makes things easier on the physical body, but it deprives the vital body. In our society, we get surplus amounts of chemical nutrients from cooked foods. We get plenty of all we need. But many people suffer and are deficient because they don't eat enough raw, fresh foods, which are the only sources for abundant life ether. As we said earlier, raw, fresh milk taken minutes from the cow is an excellent source of life ether. It does have the desire element with it, but it is a source of life ether. It's very hard to get raw, fresh milk, especially that close to its removal from the cow. And that the dairy industry has some problems of its own in many cases. The vegetable kingdom is an excellent source for life ether. Garden vegetables especially, much more so than fruits. For example, raw, fresh pressed vegetable juice taken immediately out of the juicer is a wonderful way to restore your vital body. Interesting thing about it, it's not something that you sip when you eat it. You gulp it down as quickly as you can because you're not interested that much in the chemical nutrition. You're interested in getting the ethers taken into the etheric body and incorporated before they dissipate. On the other hand, if you drink milk in gulps, you're likely to do a number on your digestive system that's not very healthy. The important thing is to take plenty of raw, fresh foods so that you don't weaken your vitality. Already almost done. That suggests yet another topic to touch on briefly. Not everything that comes from within us is intuition. Intuition, especially from the life ether, is creative and it's always new. The intuition is different in its expression each and every time. And if you have an inner experience that's twice the same way, that second expression may be questionable. It may be the product of the lower nature. It may be the product of the desire nature. We have those deviant desire impulses in us to deal with. Earlier we mentioned that we can set up a very bad attitude by being selfish, even about good food. Usually, we often tend to like food that tastes good, that tastes very good, that is not good for us. We indulge ourselves, we comfort ourselves, we reward ourselves in curiously counterproductive ways. This struggle over diet, if we let it become so, can be a large part of our life, and it can distract from our spiritual life if we let it become so. I've known people that have been distracted from becoming better people by becoming dietary fanatics and struggling with desire in such a way that they couldn't win. You know, that obsession works that way. The harder you try to overpower obsession, the harder it is to manifest. It's a hard thing to avoid because we can't go without eating. We have to eat to live. And we have the freedom, which we sometimes use in a libertine way, to select our food. And the areas of the brain where the most blood goes to are the areas that have to do with food and with sex. So it's a problem that's not going to go away. Now, since this is probably a pretty savvy crowd, I won't go into the subject of processed foods or preservatives or dyes or additives or pesticides or herbicides or any of those things, because I think everybody here knows about the poisoning that we do. We try to kill the enemy rather than strengthen the host, and that's always a great mistake. This leaves us with one other major possible misimpression to deal with. In talking about these things, I'm making suggestions about etheric-rich food. I'm making suggestions about diet, but I am not advocating any kind of diet. I am not advocating any kind of diet, not even vegetarianism, which for most people would be beneficial, because this has to be a matter of free choice. One cannot say you've got to eat this way or you've got to eat that way. I do not believe that there is one diet for everyone. That's usually insecure, fanatical thinking, fascist thinking, that everybody has to eat the same way. We've been speaking about the mineral, plant, animal, and human kingdoms. Now, that's not a perfectly accurate way to do it. What it should be is that each human is a separate kingdom, because each of us is an individual focus of the universal spirit. We're not like animals, like pandas, where all pandas eat bamboo sprouts, or like all lions eat meat. Each human is a species unto itself, according to all of its past experiences. So we have, like the statement about the ancient Iranians, one man's Mede is another man's Persian. It's an old joke, but it's still. Even very strong, overpowering medicines affect different people differently, because each person reacts differently according to what they are spiritually. Now, there may be some general things where our needs are similar. We all have intestines, and those intestines need roughage. But ultimately, each individual has his or her own appropriate, proper diet. And that diet may change according to what you're doing, or aging, or pregnancy, or if you're in training or something like that. There is no diet for all people that is exactly the same. There is no diet that remains the same for any one person. This applies to eating dead animal flesh. Some people would be better off eating animals as part of their diet than being purely vegetarian. When we spoke of sensitivity a while back, we said that there are people that are involutionary sensitives. That some people were sensitive because they hadn't come into the physical world and were reluctant to do so. And they didn't want to. They thought this world was illusion and that we should eschew it and get away from it as much as possible. Many of those people, as we said, have psychic sensitivity, but they cannot progress adequately in evolution because they're not fulfilling their responsibility to the world. We have to follow through on what we started. And we have started an arc into materiality, and unless we follow that arc out, we're not fulfilling our responsibility. Often such people lack gumption. And very often such people are vegetarian because they know that vegetarianism promotes their psychic sensitivity, which is another thing we haven't talked about, but let's just leave it at that. When one eats animal flesh, the body produces an abundance of uric acid, much more so than in a vegetarian diet. And that does more than just dull. Some of the uric acid comes out in the urea, some comes out in the sweat, and some comes out in saliva. But not all of it comes out, and not all of it is excreted. Some of it is deposited in the brain and the nervous system. Any basic book on physiology describes it. They don't describe what happens in the consciousness. People who deposit more uric acid in their nervous system are people who have more of a tendency to take initiative with the world and to have gumption, to be aggressive, to have almost an edgy assertiveness. If it's taken to extreme, it results in gout. But there is a character to a gouty person, a character type that you can see very clearly, and this is part of it. Thus, the people now who are vegetarian, who have not come into their bodies fully and carried out work in the world, would be better off if they had a diet with meat. If we are people that are graduating from the work of the world, and it is an inhibition to our finer feelings and our higher ethics, free will vegetarianism augments that impulse. In any case, each individual is responsible for his or her diet, optimal diet. Now you can be aided by studying nutrition and following nutritional plans, but that doesn't work completely. We have to discard belief systems, even some of those of material science. What we think may be a good diet may not be what actually is a good diet for us. It's a matter of working very hard and watching the response in one's body to determine what is a good diet. It's taken me many years to learn that my body really likes greens. I'm indifferent to them myself. I'm not somebody that, wow, I really love greens. But I've learned to like them because my body functions much better. I can't say that that will be the case for you or for anybody else. It's a very individual matter. And we dare not impinge on anybody else's freedom of choice. I've experimented with all kinds of dietary things. I'm pretty temperate about things. I've tried every kind of fanaticism you can think of. And after years of going through it, I've come to the conclusion that if you proceed very slowly and you see what the exclusion or inclusion of a food means to your diet, then and only then should you eliminate it or have it as part of your diet. And it usually takes at least a half a year before you know what is the best for you. So you can arrive at an optimal diet, but it takes some work and it takes some practice. Just exactly the way we said that spiritual practices are heuristic, choosing a diet should be heuristic. This is one thing that the Rosicrucian philosophy is very strong about. Self-reliance. And self-reliance means that each of us has a divinity in us that is capable of seeing for itself what works and what doesn't work. But even if we find the very best diet for ourselves, it's still no guarantee of perfect health. Until we are clean through and through, until we have dissolved our backlog of destiny, and that we are free people, and that we have liquid assets from all of our past deeds so that we can act in the moment without any impediment, we're not guaranteed that we're not going to be ill. Nonetheless, it still gives a better life. Let's close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Got a couple questions?
Sure.
You said that the allergies that we get are food allergies.
Yes.
Because of a lack of will?
That's right. Right. The claim is the anthroposophists do a lot with that, and what they have said is pretty much accepted now by medical science. And that is, for example, in infancy, if you feed a child too many new foods too quickly, you force the will out of the child too quickly, and then it's weakened generally later on, so that a child that is fed too many foods too early and has to adapt to them is more likely to have food allergies later on because of not being able to assert the will in the physical body to overpower food.
And ear infections.
Yes.
Cause that also.
Yes. And the terrible thing about ear infections is that's one of the things that they use very strong antibiotics, and they actually break down the immune system by using those strong antibiotics. Now there are specific, I just went over it really swiftly when I gave the talk, but one can have, they're determined, you can see them in the horoscope, but one can have areas where one has specific reticence about applying will. And that would be where one has specific allergies about certain kinds of foods and things like that.
Are there certain aspects to look for that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to go into it. It's a very big subject. You said you had another question.
Yeah. How about ailments? Are there certain foods that aid getting rid of ailments?
Yes.
Like that?
Yes. All the way from one extreme to an herb. Herb is really not a food because even the way you take herbs, when you take them into your body, you're supposed to take them in so that they're not digested, so that the agency of the plant is left somewhat intact and taken directly into the bloodstream, and it works then counter to the ailment. But yes, some kinds of foods promote some kinds of promote healing over given kinds of ailments. It gets into you can even get into the biochemistry of it. It's a fascinating subject, very fascinating subject.
I suppose we could write a book on it.
There are quite a few books on it. But to find, it's one area where mysticism and material science overlap pretty carefully. There's a lot of congruency in biochemistry. Like the biochemistry, the things that I don't know how we should call them, the spiritual biochemists, what they find to be true are the same things that biochemists find to be true. For example, they do a lot of studies of, at different stages of fetal development, what minerals and what salts and such are active, like, for example, when the eye is developing, and what works later on in life as biochemicals for sustaining or for helping weak organs or things like that. There's complete agreement with that, each coming from a different kind of research.
So it's not just the chemical, but could we say it's the final parts?
Yes. Yeah, we're talking about something else further there, yes. But there is something, I think there is a line in Ezekiel that says, the fruit of the tree shall be for your meat, and the leaves shall be for your medicine. Meaning to say that the complementary interaction between the human and plant kingdoms is such that even our extremities in illness are found in the extremities in plant substances, and that complementation works in that way.
This is another question, a little off topic, but the issue with body parts and things like that, where you organ or something like that.
Yes.
You become an animal or.
Yes.
Is that the same thing as overcoming the nature as taking its food?
Yes, you're talking about the rejection phenomenon. Yeah. From a spiritual point of view, I'm giving you a personal opinion. I would not take parts, nor would I give them. In the first place, organ harvest greatly disrupts the taking of the experience out of your body, because it's done in a few seconds, and it's done very radically. And so that there's a major disruption to viewing the pictures after death. And just for no other reason, the idea that this is again the idea of materialism and technology, like weaponry advanced greatly when there were interchangeable parts between guns. And people think that same way, that there are interchangeable parts between humans, and bodies are not machines. Bodies are living organisms, and they are creative expressions of spiritual beings, and the whole idea of taking parts from another and trying to put it in, it's not a correct thing to do. There are things that can be done by overpowering, but I don't think that they're necessarily good things to do.
Well, they're even considering growing their own.
Yes, I understand that.
That's from your own cell. I don't know if it has vitality or something that you have to overcome or not. Or if
Yeah.
it doesn't have them.
The way they're considering doing it right now, the parts that are being built are being grown off of other animals. So they really aren't completely human, but they have some of what they call the rejection factors. The things that would normally be rejection factors are not there, or that we have replaced our own instead.
Yeah, well, they grow ears and things like that.
Yes. I think the matter of fact is that the Rockefeller Research Institute in New York has grown almost every kind of organ. Not grown it, they can sustain the life of it, but they can't sustain the life of a body all put together. They have sustained hearts for long periods of time, and they've done that kind of activity. Well, topic that brought up some interest. Thank you very much.